Greetings, it's Tuesday, June 23rd, and today I'm going to talk a little about the Fed and the stock market. I recently had a question or statement from a client that the Fed was intending to influence the stock market. A lot of people are asking right now, why does the stock market keep going up when we have all this bad news going on? I don't have the answer to that. Anybody who tells you they have the answer to that, I wouldn't believe them. But one thing that is clear to me as an economist is that the Fed is not trying to influence the stock market. And how do I know this? Well, first of all, that would be completely counter to their mandate. The Fed has two mandates, a dual mandate, and that is to maximize employment and minimize inflation, otherwise known as keep price stability. Neither of those two things says maintain the wealth of the stockholders in the stock market. Now that you can argue that those things would certainly be connected, and the Fed is not oblivious to the fact that maximum employment and minimum inflation is connected to a healthy, growing stock market. But nevertheless, the actions that the Fed has taken lately are not with the intent to influence the stock market. They're with the intent to keep jobs as much as possible. So in the way that the Fed can do their best job at doing that is to keep credit and loans flowing to businesses and banks. So to the businesses through the banks. It's different than the PPP program that Congress passed. Totally different thing. What the Fed's doing is all behind the scenes with treasury securities, with mortgage-backed securities. You may remember in the crisis, they bought a bunch of mortgage-backed securities. There's a lot of stuff going on where the Fed is trying to make the money supply very available for banks and businesses. And that brings up another topic that some have said, well, now we're going to have inflation because the Fed is printing all this money. We might. Well, the last time in 2008 and 9, the Fed pumped billions into these same money markets and we did not get significant inflation. Why did that happen? Well, think of the Fed putting money out in the market like going fishing. If you go fishing, you have your equipment, which consists of a rod and some line and some bait and a hook on the end of the line. And you cast the bait out in there and you hope for a fish, but not too big of a fish, because too big of a fish is too hard to reel in and could break the line. You also can have more than one line out there to try and maximize your catch. Another thing you can do when you're fishing is you can give the fish some slack with the line, but you don't want that to go on for too long, because if you're not holding on to the line and it's tight, you can't tell if you have a fish on the other end or not. So think of the last time the Fed put a lot of bait in the water and they put lines out with this extra money that they put out there. Well, the fish didn't really bite. And how does that translate? In order for the fish to bite, that means that consumers have to spend the money. And what happened after 2008, 2009 was that consumers were in so much debt that they used extra money to pay down debt and save money. They resisted spending as they had in the pre-2008 era. Not that they quit completely, but they didn't spend it all. So the Fed was able to control the slack, was able to control the size of the lines enough that the economy was able to recover in a healthy way relative to the number of fish and the size of fish that were biting. And right now, we have a very similar situation where no matter how much slack the Fed puts out there or Congress, right now people aren't biting. They're not spending. And that, you might remember George Bush after 9/11 telling everybody to go to the mall, okay? We want a good balance. We want between, how much money is out there and whether the fish are biting or not. There are no indications that the fish are going to be biting. Finally, how do we know all this and how the Fed operates. If you're really interested in the behind the scenes operations of the Fed, you can read their minutes of their meetings. So for example, I'll post a link to the last minutes that we have, which are from May of 2020, which are from the April meeting that they posted in May. It's usually about a month delay. And the word S&P 500 index is mentioned once in 13 pages, and equity index is mentioned once in 13 pages. So of all the things that the Fed is looking at and of all the policy they're looking at, it's about their concern for the most vulnerable households and their ability to spend, but their ability to stay afloat, really, and small businesses as well. And they don't want the freezing up of the credit markets for banks to stop lending to businesses. So that's where their focus is. Whatever the stock market does, they don't have any control over it, and they're not trying to control it. So I welcome your feedback, thoughts, questions. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.